Welcome, everybody, to the Labor for Life podcast. This is your podcast for all things work, unions, and the economy from a pro-life perspective. This is your host, Dr. Gauderi Rodriguez Cambry. Today, we're going to be covering the first 100 days of President Trump. We are also going to be covering the latest tariff deals that the administration have accomplished, and we have a very special update on Representative Jasmine Crockett and some other high-profile Democrats. So just stay tuned. On April 30, 2025, it was the 100 days of President Trump's second term as president. We're going to give a summary both of his accomplishments in pro-life and his accomplishments with the economy in general. For his accomplishments in pro-life, I'll be relying on Kristen Hawkins, President of Students for Life, summary that she submitted on X. As far as his major pro-life victories, we can name the following. Pardon 23 pro-life activists prosecuted under the Biden's Department of Justice for praying outside abortion vendors. Reinstated the Mexico City policy, cutting off U.S. taxpayer funding for abortions abroad. Vice President J.D. Vance addressed the National Pro-Life March in person, and President Trump also addressed the pro-life march live from the White House. President Trump backed the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which will ensure medical care for babies who survive botched abortions. He signed an executive order enforcing the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment blocks federal funding for elective abortions. He ended taxpayer-funded abortions in the military and froze $20 million in taxpayer funding to Planned Parenthood. And in an upcoming reconciliation bill, it is expected that Planned Parenthood may be totally defunded. This is quite an amazing and extraordinary pro-life work for the first 100 days. And again, I want to say thanks to Kristen Hawkins for this wonderful summary of President Trump's accomplishment in pro-life. It's really hard to say which of these great accomplishments we should be more thankful for. Certainly, as pro-lifers, we expect the restoration of the Hyde Amendment and also of the Mexico City policy. But I think it's very dear to our hearts the fact that President Trump pardoned the 23 pro-life activists, because we know that under the Biden-Harris administration, it was a priority for that administration to destroy the culture of life and to go after the leaders in the culture of life. The pro-lifers who were praying outside of the abortion clinics, they're exercising their First Amendment right. And they're also there to save children. But the Biden administration used the law to unlawfully get people, even in jail, for simply trying to tell mothers that there's a different option. We know that the Biden-Harris administration were totally obsessed with abortion. And in fact, we dodged a bullet with Harris because she was particularly very insistent in abortion. She would have made it so that it would have been impossible to have any pro-life laws in this country. Instead of that, we have President Trump, who is fighting for us, for the American people. And so he pardoned these 23 pro-life activists, that's enormously, enormously important. I also think that everything that has to do with the funding Planned Parenthood is going to be enormously important as well, since Planned Parenthood simply sees abortion as a business. And many, many children lose their life through the Planned Parenthood clinics. We do not need our taxpayer money to go for that purpose. Therefore, we are celebrating the $20 million in taxpayer funding that it was already froze to Planned Parenthood, but we're especially looking forward to the reconciliation bill that is expected to pass this summer, and hopefully Planned Parenthood will be totally defunded in that bill. So really incredible first 100 days in terms of the pro-life agenda for the Trump administration. We celebrate all of these victories, and we certainly expect a lot more to come because the fight is only beginning. Very intensely. It's only beginning. Let's also address the accomplishments of President Trump on regards to the economy. And here, there are many things to celebrate as well. First of all, in the first 100 days of President Trump, we've had 345,000 new jobs added to the economy, more than expected. Many of these jobs are actually private sector jobs as opposed to public sector. That's also very important because during the Biden-Harris administration, they use all kinds of gimmicks to say that they have created jobs, including trying to create a bunch of part-time jobs and saying that, they were creating jobs. So the jobs that the Trump administration are focusing on creating are jobs that will last in the long run. They're promoting jobs in the private sector. They're promoting jobs that are full-time, and that people will be able to sustain their families on those jobs. Another accomplishment was that finally the eggs and the gasoline went down. Eggs went down 50%. Gasoline went down 7% during the Biden years. We had a terrible inflation. Everything went up. So amazingly, in the first 100 days, President Trump has been able to get essentially things that matter to the average American person down. The news doesn't really want to cover this, although they have begun to, because people had noticed that the groceries are cheaper and that the gas is down. So now the news outlets are beginning to cover it. But it's simply remarkable that already in the first 100 days we can see this difference. Also, during these 100 years, there's been over $5 trillion in investment in America. President Trump has focused his agenda on getting his economic agenda on getting tons and tons of investments in America so that long term we have more jobs, we have a better stable economy. Over 5 trillion already. And since then, there's been other investments announced. In fact, the president was recently in Saudi Arabia, and they committed over $600 billion in investments to America. So, and that's not included in the 5 trillion. So really incredible, all the investments that President Trump is getting to us. Also, 0.4% of wage growth $935 billion saved. Dutch has, the Department of Government Efficiency certainly has collaborated in slashing fraud in waste, fraud, and abuse in government. And in the U.S. Department of Labor specifically, there's already been a savings of $250 million in waste, fraud, and abuse, a bunch of contracts that were put in America last. And the Secretary of Labor, Secretary Lori Chavez de Remer, has made sure that we reverse those policies and we put America first and American workers first. In addition, the Secretary of Labor, Secretary Chavez de Remer, she has been doing an America at Work listening tour where she's going to every state of the nation and meets with workers to listen directly from them, their concerns and their hopes, which is a very important thing, that she is collecting this sense of what the actual American worker needs in one. So on the economy, certainly President Trump's accomplishments are remarkable. We have a lot of investments coming into America. We have an economic strategy that is already giving results in things that we can tangibly see, such as the groceries and the gas going down. And there's a lot of savings that are already happening in the economy. And we need those savings because we were essentially on a road to bankruptcy. Now, what has been the position of the unions and the leadership of the unions through the AFL-CIO on regards to President Trump's first 100 days? Perhaps not shockingly, the AFL-CIO leadership has actually simply attacked President Trump's first 100 days. And we're going to be looking at that attack that they did through a report that they published in April of 2025. It's called Death on the Job, The Toll of Neglect. And this is a report that the AFL-CIO publishes every year. The one for this year, they make sure to use to attack President Trump's first 100 days, even though the data of the topic that they cover, which is death on the job, the data is essentially about 2023. So those were very solid a Biden-Harris administration year, not President Trump. But yet, the AFL-CIO report takes the time to attack President Trump's first 100 days. And they essentially focus on DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. They state in the report that no significant waste, fraud, or abuse has been identified in federal agencies, which they must be living on the moon to make such a statement. Since the information of DOGE is totally public. They publish everything that they do and where they cut in the waste and why. And the AFL-CIO does not recognize any of that, does not recognize that there's been waste and fraud and abuse that has been already identified and cut from the government. Instead, they try to argue that President Trump has done nothing for the working class men and women, has done nothing to protect them, has done nothing to improve working conditions. But that flies in the face of the accomplishments that we just talked about, and that it's hard to see how the AFL-CIO wouldn't know about the new jobs that have been creating, about the trillions in investments that have been secured, about the wage growth. Hard to see that the AFL-CIO wouldn't know about these accomplishments. So their report simply paints President Trump in a bad light, and then paints the Biden administration in a good light. And they only list what they believe are accomplishments of the Biden administration. No mention whatsoever that during the pandemic, the Biden administration tried to ensure that people didn't work, essentially did everything that they could for people to not make a living. No mention whatsoever of the concerns and irregular death that happened as part of the whole inoculation that occurred during the pandemic. No concern whatsoever for that or for the violation of people's right during the pandemic to exercise their own discretion and religious conscience. No concern whatsoever. Really difficult to take the AFL-CIO's position seriously when they act so disingenuously and where they cannot be taken seriously when these accomplishments of the Trump administration for the American people are very obvious, and they don't even point to any of it. So that's the perspective of the AFL-CIO. In the meantime, there's been other unions that have come in defense of President Trump. Certainly the auto and manufacturing unions. For them, it's been very important the steps that the Trump administration has taken to push for the tariffs, to push for a more equal level playing field. I expect that eventually the AFL-CIO will have to come around because the accomplishments and the good things that this administration are doing for the American workers is simply too overwhelming. So in summary, the first 100 days of President Trump has been quite amazing, both on the pro-life front and on the economy front. Now, I promise you that I will give you an update on the state of the tariffs. Essentially a week after President Trump's 100 days, 8 days to be exact after, President Trump announced that the first new tariff deal had been accomplished with no other than the United Kingdom. This happened on May 8, 2025. And it sent the markets on a great joy because this was the first tariff deal that had been secured. Really wonderful that it was with the United Kingdom, which many people doubted that will happen, and yet they did come to the table and they got to a deal with President Trump. 4 days after, on May 12, 2025, the administration announced a deal with China. So now the U.S. have a tariff deal with UK and with China. Many so-called experts didn't think that a deal with China will happen anytime soon, and President Trump has already secured it. It's a 90-day pause on the trade war, and both countries will have a 30% tariff. But it's certainly a deal, and it shows that China is willing to get to a more permanent deal. So all around, a great victory for President Trump on the tariffs deal. Now UK and China both have deals, which is really awesome for the American people. I also promised you that I will give you an update on Representative Jasmine Crockett. This is the Texas Congresswoman who made comments that essentially illegals are the new slaves and illegal immigration should be supported because of that, because black people are done picking cotton and they cannot get paid enough to be at the plantation. So now we have illegals for that purpose. So this outrageous representative is currently under investigation. There is an FEC complaint against her. There is an allegation that she used donations done through ActBlue improperly. We will keep you posted about this complaint, but certainly there is no surprise that someone that thinks that there's a group that is available for some new type of slavery is also a very corrupt individual. Alongside with Jasmine Crockett, there's another high-profile Democrat on the news, and that is the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James. You will remember James because she persecuted President Trump before the election, and did secure an indictment and then a conviction against President Trump for very bogus claims that he somehow inflated the value of his homes in order to get loans from the banks. Now, all the banks, they very clearly said that they were not victims, they did not suffer any loss whatsoever, or all of the loans were paid. But unfortunately, because New York has corrupt officials in the charge, they were able to say that somehow President Trump did something wrong when he didn't. Well, the same Letitia James, turns out that she did things that apparently she thought were above the law. She is now accused of lying in mortgage applications throughout a couple of decades. There's one accusation that she obtained a building in which the documents say that her father is her husband. There is another allegation that she obtained a mortgage for another home, and the documents claim that the property was 4 bedrooms when in fact the property is 5 bedrooms. And there is also an allegation that in 2023 she obtained a residence in Virginia and claimed it as her primary residence, which, as the New York attorney, she could not have been also a resident of Virginia. She cannot be the Attorney General and be a resident of New York and be a resident of another state. But somehow Letitia James was trying to claim that as well. So all of that is under investigation. The person who put all of this together, Sam Antar, he has appeared in Rob Smith's Tonight, and Rob Smith has interviewed him several times. And Mr. Antar says that the evidence is very clear. The documents are public. We can totally see how she signed this paperwork, what the paperwork alleged, and then we can see the contradiction in other documents as well. So we'll be following that, but it's interesting that Jasmine Crockett, this woman Letitia James, and let's not forget Fannie Willis, a district attorney in Georgia who also went after Trump. All three of them black women who seem to be very incompetent in their positions and very corrupt. This is what the Democrats do. They actually are trying to destroy minorities by recruiting minorities that are very incompetent and very corrupt, so that the credibility of minorities in general can be destroyed. This party is up to no good. And we will be here to cover all of this. So friends, this is the end of the podcast today. Please stay tuned. Remember that Labor for Life is published every week, but it alternates between English and Spanish. So the next time that we'll be seeing you in English will be in 2 weeks. And if you also speak Spanish, then you can hear us next week. Until next time. Bye.